So I'm Tom Linnell. I'm a psychologist and also have worked my way up to the level 3 certified alcohol and drug counselor for the state. So I have an interest particularly in kids and families, and have worked at both the mental health center earlier in my career and in private practice downtown for going on 36 years now. So, and if private practice means anything, it means I've been practicing for a long time, and I'm starting to think that I actually understand one or two things about it all. So I neglected to say that I've got two kids of my own who are now in their early 30s, who both went through the Puda School District and had their own adventures and misadventures with drugs and alcohol. And so, you know, our kids, I do think, come along to teach us things that we need to learn, and so I've learned a good deal of what I know from my own kids as well as everybody else's. I would also want to add that out of the practice that Tom and I are both in, there are 6 people basically associated with the practice, and over the years between us, we've raised 11 kids, and we have a weekly staff meeting, have had for going on 30 years, and very regularly we've suspended our discussions of all the other issues that we're working with to say, guys, I need to talk about my son or my daughter, and some very potent emotional sessions based on trying to learn how to raise our own kids during moments of crisis. And we've had crises of various kinds with every single one of them. So professionals are not exempt from what goes on when kids are growing up. Okay. So as I was thinking about how to tackle a subject like the early warning signs of substance abuse, it seemed to me that, you know, you could arrange this basically in kind of a big 3 very obvious signs of substance abuse, and a big 3 subtle signs of substance abuse, early signs, warning signs. Well, we've talked a little bit about what are the subtle and the obvious signs, and then why it's important to have certain reactions to each of them. I do want to talk some more about how our roles as parents can really impact our kids, things that we may not even be aware of. So we'll get down to that. And then even just as I came in, Lori approached me, and we were chatting just for a moment about developments that she is seeing, and we both agreed that there are drugs now being abused that we didn't know about when we were growing up, and we probably scarcely know about them even now. So just when you think you know what's in play, something new comes over the horizon, and it takes us a while as individuals and as a community to think how to react, how to deal. So hopefully we'll get through all of that, and questions and thoughts and complaints and ideas and brilliant insights coming from you. Okay. The obvious signs, the ones that it would not take brilliance to recognize, include intoxication. If your kid comes home drunk, passes out, and throws up on the front lawn, you don't need a primer to teach you you've got a problem. Arrest. or, as we're reading in the paper more now, suspension from school for some kind of substance use or abuse violation. And then discovery, third thing is if you discover some kind of a stash of pot in the closet, or as I did with my son, who would probably chuckle if he heard me tell him this story, but when we were cleaning out his room after he'd moved off to college, and we were pretty sure he wouldn't be coming back again, we picked up his desk and had to tip it to get it through the door, and when I tipped it, 3 cans of beer rolled out of the back from behind the drawer. So next time I was on the phone with him, I said, "So, Aaron, you won't believe what I found in your room." "What's that?" 3 cans of beer." He said, "Oh, geez, I forgot I had them there." So I think that was the only stash that ever existed in our house, and seems pretty innocent, but you know, there's that, and it becomes quite a discussion for families and in counseling as well when parents find a real stash of something that alarms them, you know, a bag or 2 of pot, or just paraphernalia. And the question then gets to be, well, what do we do about it? Again, it doesn't take rocket science to say if your kid comes home drunk or is brought home by the police in some kind of an altered state, you notice it. And we're going to talk some more about what are the interventions that are available to us? What can we do? I am fond of Foster Cline and Jim Fay's thoughts about that, one piece of their thoughts. They have a whole series of books and tapes and DVDs and CDs about parenting with love and logic. And Jim Fay was a school principal for years and years in the Denver area before he went to work consulting with Foster. And their favorite way of dealing with crises is not to deal. So if the poop has just hit the fan, what they recommend is learning to raise one eyebrow and then walk away, which comes to mean to the kid, well, I'm not in trouble now, or at least I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to be. And then the kid gets to stew on that for 24 hours, knowing that dad or mom is not going to lose it right here and now, but they're going to get back to me. And sometimes that's the most impactful intervention of the moment. So just because something looks like a crisis doesn't mean we have to react to it right then and there. It's always good to take your time. So the more subtle signs, the big 3 subtle signs that I've learned to appreciate include basically the overarching title here is changes. So grades that once were okay slip. Okay. Number 1. You know, and school grades are a kid's review of how they're doing. Just like on the job, we get a review of how we're doing periodically. And school is kids' work, so how are they doing? And when the grades slip off, it means something. It doesn't necessarily mean they're out fooling around, but it means something, and we have to pay attention. Another change, the second one, is changing friends. Now, well, I'll say more about why that's a problem. But the third one is a change that represents a loss of interest or drive or motivation. Now, the difficulty I mean, those would be like a kid who was really enthusiastic about whatever, hockey, gymnastics, chess club, all these millions of different things kids can be really enthusiastic about, and then suddenly beginning to lose interest in preference for kind of vague other things like hanging out with their friends, or maybe not hanging out anywhere, maybe just being in their room. So behaviors, any specific behavior in and of itself may not be a real concern, but a shift, a change of behavior out of the ordinary should catch our notice at least. Now the problem with these subtle signs of possible substance abuse is that they are also normal events in adolescence, right? What a kid's in love with at age 11 or 12 is probably not going to be what they're really going for at age 14. That's normal. And when kids hit middle school, and Tom, you know from being a counselor in middle schools for so long, friendships form and break and form and break and move over and over, almost daily. So it may or may not mean anything if a kid used to hang out with these guys and now hangs out with these guys. But it should catch our attention, right? Falling grades, whether it's from A's to B's or C's to D's or falling off the chart. School gets tougher. Kids develop other interests. Public schools often don't really fit very well for many kids, lots of kids. So again, in and of itself, may not mean much, but it should catch our attention. So we don't want to overinterpret what we're seeing. And that, in a minute, we'll talk more about our choices, our behaviors, our responses. By the way, my daughter fell into the second category of getting arrested for substances on the way to a Rocky Mountain High School football game. She never got there because she and her 3 friends had an open container in the car and suffered the consequences. So, seen that too. Okay, so between the 2 clusters of signs and symptoms, the obvious ones and the subtle ones, the subtle ones are potentially more serious. And if we really watch closely and see that there is a problem going on, for sure, they are the more important ones to be watching. But I do think it's the obvious ones that we get hung up on and we fumble the most often. Now, why is that? Well, when a kid is blatantly drinking, smoking pot, getting way too involved with spice and K2, et cetera, et cetera. And particularly when it comes to our attention in ways that are hard to ignore. The neighbors all kind of notice when your kid passes out on the front lawn. Lots of people notice when a kid is arrested or suspended, etc. And so, as you know, when your kids encounter legal repercussions, it's very uncomfortable. The problem is when we get uncomfortable, we tend to lapse into undesirable behaviors. One is denial. It's very easy to slip into denial and to say I don't think it's that big a problem. Or, I did that once. Or, that school's kind of had it out for him for quite a while now. I think I'm kind of sick of it. I think I'd like to switch him to another school. Right? So we get into denial, we minimize how serious the thing might be, and we kind of reflexively recoil instead of leaning into it and saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? It's a pretty sure bet that by the time a kid shows up at home drunk, he's been drunk a bunch of times. Just as we know that by the time a kid gets arrested for shoplifting, he has committed that offense upwards of 50 times. I don't know what the figures are, haven't seen any, on how many times has a kid abused substances before somebody couldn't help noticing. But human nature, it's a bunch. So we don't want to get into denial. We don't want to minimize it. It's important. Something's going on. It's also very easy, I think, there are 5 ways we react that aren't so pretty. One is denial. Second one is overprotectiveness. It's pretty natural when the police and the juvenile magistrate and perhaps probation or the center get involved. It's pretty natural to get triangulated. So then we've got the kid and the parent, and suddenly we've got the authorities involved. And the natural reflex is to move to defend our kid, sort of mama bear style, against this outside force. And really to feel quite strongly, my kid's getting picked on. Now, there's another reaction we can have, which is utter exasperation with the kid, and then becoming punitive and judgmental in our own right with our kid. But the more likely reaction is to feel defensive. What I have encouraged parents to do for a long time is actually to view the probation folks or the people here at the center as allies, not necessarily friends, but allies whose goal is the same as our goal, helping this kid get through the difficult, awkward times of adolescence and become a functioning young adult. It's actually a good thing sometimes when an outside support system can come in. Doesn't have to be the law either. It can be the school counselor and other folks, a whole variety of folks. Sometimes it's a relative, friend, grandparent, neighbor. But when somebody else gets involved, not to view them as the enemy, but to welcome them as a potential help. It's sometimes a hard sell to the kid, though. So at the very least, my hope is that I get mom and dad to say, oh, okay, right, we're on the same team, and then to work. And that can be very difficult even after a brush or two with the court system. It can be a hard sell to parents as well, because they can feel, all of us can feel as if the law is harsh, the law is very slow moving, and the final judgments are sometimes enough to make you go, wow, did I need this in my life? But we're better off, and I think the kids are finally better off if we can work together with whoever ends up on our doorstep. Kids aren't going to necessarily believe that. They may look back on it later and say, yeah, that was okay. A third not so great reaction we might have when this kind of crisis arises is parents turning against one another. So It's actually a more exquisite, excruciating pain if it's a single parent, because then you can get really doubtful and guilty and hard on yourself, and that's no more fun than having the two parents and the two parents getting divided by the stress and pointing fingers at each other or bringing up old grievances between each other. So it's a stress point. And I think we need to remember not to turn on each other, not to criticize each other, but to work even harder to communicate and plan well together. A fourth, not so helpful reaction that we might have is kind of getting frozen in place, thinking, I ought to do something here, but I'm afraid. And the fear is, I'm going to alienate this kid. I'm going to lose him for sure if I put down the consequences that so-and-so is saying I should, or the guys at work are telling me, yeah, you should, get him. And I'm afraid to do it. I don't want to make my kid mad at me. It's not the reaction we need to have. What we need to be able to do is respond with calm assurance, plan well, but then execute, and don't be afraid. And particularly, don't be afraid of alienating a kid forever. I can't tell you how many kids I've had in my office, and Tom, you may have had a bunch of them too, who in a moment of openness and candor will say, I'm actually glad my parents bought that UA kit, because now when the guys all want to toke up, I can tell them, geez, guys, I can't do that because my parents are going to bust me when I get home. And then what the guys say is, oh yeah, poor you, too bad. And then they go on and do what they're going to do, but this is off the hook because that's kind of a pass that the group will give them. So it's reassuring to the kids, actually, to know that Mom and Dad are watching. Mom and Dad will do the UA kit. Mom and Dad will smell their breath. Mom and Dad will ask questions. And they'll do what they have to do. So, right. So rather than being afraid that the kids are going to get turned off and angry forever, just know that by being firm and clear, you're giving them something they can actually feel good about. Not that they'll tell you that. They're not going to look in the grocery sack and say, oh, good, you bought that UA kit. I've been waiting for you to do that. Yeah. And then the fifth one, poor reaction that we might have is allowing ourselves to get into confusion and doubt about what are the appropriate consequences for any infraction. The alternative is when you're not sure what to do, cut out the video games, take away the cell phone, ground them, restrict them in a variety of ways, take away the keys, whatever. When we're not sure, it's a good time to talk to other people. Like you said, other people have been through this. They've discovered things that work and things that tend not to. And people love to give advice, so there's no reason not to ask folks, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? And it's okay, Jim Fay style, to take your time. Let the kid know, I'll get back to you. and then be sure to get back to them. And when you do, you lay on the consequence. The problem with laying on a consequence right away, of course, is it's probably going to be done in a bit of anger, if not hysteria, and you'll wake up the next day and go, oy, oy, oy.
I mean, you can't ground them for life?
Grounding them for life, that's a good one, right, right. We can safely say that that has never worked out for parents or children. Right. Right. So, never to wallow in our doubt and uncertainty. You know, school counselors are pretty good resources too. It's good if they're tuned in, for one thing, and so they know kind of what's going on in the background for a kid. And B, they often have a very good sense of what an appropriate consequence might be. Or not, and can keep us from making some of the more dumb mistakes. Okay? So, I want to flip that around then, because there are at least 5 really desirable, helpful behaviors that we can use as parents that will help the kid grow up healthier. So I don't want to just dwell on the mistakes we can make, but let's talk about the good stuff we can do. Number 1 in the 5 that I think are really great is modeling. So, you know, if we want our kid to think before he acts, if we want our kid to be brave enough to say, that's not going to work for me, we have to model that. And kids are watching. Kids are watching. I mean, it goes without saying that you can't quite pull off standing in the kitchen lecturing a kid about the evils of drinking with a can of beer in your hand. Your can of beer. With his can of beer, that might be all right. Etc. And I used to, when I coached my kids in soccer, I used to just shake my head because the parents, I hope I'm not offending anybody in this room, I'm sure I'm not actually, but the parents that I had the most trouble with were the ones who were screaming the loudest at their kid to get going and get after that ball and you know, go, 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 go. And the parent obviously had not gone for quite a while, and at every quarter was going off to smoke a cigarette and was modeling none of the let's be fit, let's get after it, let's have fun with soccer. But they were always the ones that yelled the loudest.
I knew I recognized you from somewhere.
Well, I never did anything about it. But when I yelled at the referee, I got red carded twice, so I know about yelling on the sidelines. So modeling, we have to ask ourselves, are we good models for what we expect and hope our kids are going to do? Open dialogue is the second one. So, I mean, the bad joke version of that is the dad who sits down in all seriousness with the kid at the kitchen table and says, son, I hear there's a drug problem at your school. And the kid says, no, there's no problem. I can get anything I want anytime. The better version of that is being willing to talk to the kids without hysteria, without anger, and without being afraid to seem dumb. Fact is, things are going around that you didn't know about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, because they didn't exist. And if you're going to hear terms and names and things, and you're going to say, what the heck is that? And in an open dialogue, it's okay to say, what the heck is that? I don't know what that is. It's not very often that our kids actually have the opportunity to think, well, I know something my old man doesn't know. Guess I could fill him in. If he believes he's not going to get chewed out for it. Right? So open dialogue means asking questions if you need to ask questions. I'm imagining that all over town there are some pretty interesting discussions right now about the medical marijuana issue coming up on the ballot. And that, again, in an open dialogue, it'd be really great to get a feeling for what is the kid thinking and what are his friends or her friends thinking. If we haven't done that, well, what are we waiting for? Because again, they've got their ideas. They know what's going on. And if we're not asking, we're missing something. The third good behavior, I think, on our part is candor, openness. Now, I don't think that means telling old war stories about how me and the guys went to Joey's wedding and got smashing drunk and drove all the way back from Kalamazoo to whatever, and lucky we survived. You know, I mean, the war stories don't count. But the serious reflections on our own history do count. Serious reflections. Yeah, I tried this. I did that. Here's how it worked for me. Here's where it fits in my life now. I've sometimes told kids, I've told my kids that 161 people graduated from my high school class, senior class, 50 years ago. Just went back to my reunion. And within 3 months, 2 of us were dead from alcohol-related accidents, vehicle accidents. Very sobering. So, not to either tell war stories or to tell the scary stories intended to scare kids off, but rather to tell from the heart, here's what I did, here's what it did for me, here's why I do or don't continue to do that, and here's my hope for you. That's a good dialogue. It's a good opener. Yeah. Fourth really positive parenting behavior is that calm assurance. There are, several, 2 or 3 really outstanding examples for me of when I lost my calm with one or both of my kids, and I just grieve those to this day. It's just unskillful, as they say. What we ought to be aspiring to is the ability to stop and think long enough to be rational, and then to be open. It may be, rather than losing it right away, we take 10 seconds and that's just, empty time is empty time, and then we say, if we have to say something like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to say. I need to think about this. Right now I'm sad. Right now I'm really scared. Right now I'm angry, but I don't know what to make of this deal. So we don't need to talk right now, but we're going to talk some more. And just let it be, but be calm throughout the whole thing. So that when we get back together with the kid, we've set the stage for calmness, and we have the legitimacy of being able to be assured, like, I've thought about it. I got some things to say. Let me tell you what I think. Kids don't mind listening. if it's like that. They don't like listening if they're getting chewed out. So, not that I had never chewed out or felt good about chewing out. There's times when just briefly chewing a little, like spankings, swats for 3 and 4-year-olds, is a nice direct route to the brain. So it's all right to be human in that way too, but for the most part we want to be calm. And then lastly, the fifth and I think a really invaluable parenting behavior is to allow consequences to occur. And early on in kids' lives, it's like they left their lunch on the counter. What do I do? Well, the natural consequence is you get a little hungry at noontime, or you have to. I mean, I sweat through the first time it happened, I sweat through the long day wondering how Erica did. And I checked in with her when we all got home, and she said, oh yeah, I figured out I left it there. I just borrowed a little from here and a little from there, and I got some lunch. And I thought, I suffered all day because I worried about her. She did fine. So, natural consequences, the things that just naturally occur, and logical consequences, the things that we have to put on a situation. We shouldn't be afraid to let them happen. It's okay. So we don't need to go around making excuses for our kids or intervening. If we find ourselves emailing or on the phone with a teacher or the probation officer or standing up in court, going the extra mile to represent our kid, probably don't need to do that. Probably need to let the real, as well Foster and Jim both say, make home as much like the real world as possible. Make home as much like the real world as possible. Out there in the real world, the state trooper who just stopped you for going 85 in a 65 zone is not going to care that your father is going to be unhappy. He's going to do what he's going to do. So if a kid has always been rescued at home and let off the hook, that's going to come as a really rude shock and make him resentful and angry. Well, it shouldn't. A kid should be able to say, I just got a ticket. That's exactly what my dad would have done. And life is pretty coherent at that point. It's okay. Okay, so again, when Lori and I touched base coming in, we realized there were a few other things going on. I want to say, in the last year, I have become extremely upset and alarmed by the false marijuana stuff, the K2 spice synthetic marijuana. I don't know if you've seen the articles about it. Some of the big magazines have finally taken it up, but there are people mixing up batches, they're chemists, mixing up batches of goofy stuff in their garages and selling it and making upwards of $3 or $4 million a year on a backyard garage operation. And when the authorities catch wind of it and find some way to discourage it one way or another, they just mix the formula a little differently and slap a different label on it. And last week it was spice, and this week it's something else, and next week it'll be something else. But it has the same dumb effect. Now, it's not just marijuana with a few additives. It's a bunch of chemicals with maybe, yes or no, some marijuana in it. What I've seen is the kids I've seen on it are as addicted as any person I've seen on meth or heroin or cocaine. They cannot leave it alone. And it's relatively cheap. And it's sold over the counter. Oh yeah, they can't pass legislation fast enough to keep up with it. So they can just sell it on the counter. Or they can sell it under the counter, however they choose. And the kids I've seen have A, lost all interest in school or any other activity they ever valued, and B, become aggressive beyond belief, staging brawls with mom and dad to the point of physical harm. And then hospitalized, jailed / hospitalized, get out, and within a few days they're doing it again. So, as parents, we have a challenge just to figure out if that's what's going on. There's one other source of dangerous stuff, and that's the family medicine chest. And there are lots of parties now where the ticket to gain entry is you got to have a pocket full of whatever you could find at home. And literally, we'll just throw it all in the middle of the table or in a big punch bowl, everything they could find in the medicine chest without care for what it might be or who it's for. And then, have at it. We should make note too that, I don't know why they picked this topic, but National Geographic magazine in the current issue has a really very good article on the teenage brain, interviewing some National Institutes of Mental Health professionals who've actually given workshops here in Fort Collins. I mean, known good researchers who do a good job of telling you why your kid between the ages of 13 and really 25, but at least 18 or 20, can't. They're doing the best they can. They're trying to understand how the world all works, but their brain is going through some changes that they, yeah. We've always needed guidance through those years, always. I don't care if it was 50 years ago down on the farm. I mean, you could do real harm to yourself on the tractor too, or any number of ways. I should have been dead 6 times getting through those years with my boat on the lake, and so we've always needed guidance.
Yep.
Always.
And I think one of the things that's nice about the center is that with them coming into the programs, we give them an opportunity to grow up, and mature, and then give them a little extra time to guide them through some really turbulent stuff, because peer pressure, just in our discussion on Tuesday night, peer pressure is huge with these guys. They want to be accepted. They want to be known as cool. They want to be part of something, and they're willing to do whatever that takes to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just got to give them time to just keep trying creative things with them, because not everything works.
Right.
Not everything works.
Yeah.
But they're so research savvy. I mean, they are little computer, they know how to access stuff, they know how to get it, they know how to research it, we've taught them very well on the internet system and Facebook, and we've taught them very well.
And that they do much as adults do. They gather information that supports what they would like to believe, right? So then I think our role needs to be to be inquiring, like, where did you get that fact or that information? And then take a look at it and say, well, that doesn't agree with what I saw over here, and you've got another site with some other information. And only by being open to what they've put together can you hope to slip something from what you've gathered across into their thought process. And eventually, they will wake up and say, it's working out more like Dad and Mom said it would than the way I thought it would. And then they're starting to think for themselves. So it's very tricky to figure out how to get the message across, particularly to a brain that is only receiving limited information and processing it kind of poorly.